Now with us to give us some perspective, John Makin from the American Enterprise Institute. John Makin, great to have you with us. So what do you take away from that interview with Austin Goolsbee? I mean, does that sound as if the administration really believes what S&P is saying, or are they just starting to take what they like out of the S&P statement and leave what they don't like?
Well, I think the S&P downgrade is the important thing. Obviously, the administration is going to try to downplay it. But look, S&P has given folks a wake-up call on both sides of the political spectrum. That is, it's time to get moving on reducing the deficit. So I think that to call it a political judgment is perhaps a little misleading. It's implied a market judgment. That is, there's a real need for the U.S. to get serious about reducing the budget deficit. Secondly, I think you need to remember that last year, when the economy was weakening, we got a lot of extra fiscal stimulus out of the government. This takes that off the table. So it puts more of a burden on the Fed going forward if the economy should slow.
Now, John Makin, we've had two commissions on trying to reduce the debt and the deficit. Today, David Walker, the former Comptroller General of the Government Accounting Office, now with the Comeback America initiative, he says that this S&P move is a wake-up call, that it implies that we are on an imprudent fiscal path. It sounds like everybody knows this. There's no big secret here. So what is it going to take to get a deal done in Washington between Democrats and Republicans?
Well, I think I would argue that an S&P outlook downgrade is a step in the right direction, in the sense it gives the leadership on both sides, Republican and Democratic, something to point to when they're talking to their membership, especially their more extreme members, and say, look, we have to do this. Otherwise, the consequences are going to be very negative for the United States, because we'll have higher interest rates and when we need to do a lot of borrowing.
So does this mean that politicians need a third party to point their fingers to? They're not going to take any of the heat themselves?
No, I think we've seen the politicians take some heat. We got some cuts in the 2011 budget just last week, and moving forward, we're going to need to keep their feet to the fire and get them serious about addressing the deficit issue when they talk about the 2012 budget when they get back from their recess.
John Makin, do you believe that people in Washington are disconnected from the population at large? Because most people you talk to, I mean, they seem to understand the issues related to the budget and the budget deficit as well as the debt ceiling, and yet the rancor continues in Washington. Why is that?
The rancor, because there are two parties with different constituencies. I think the posturing I have seen so far on the budget and the deficit going forward is quite typical. I've seen it for 20 years here. Always a lot of extreme comments and sounding like we're not going to get a deal. In the end, we'll get a deal. We will, I think, get some convincing measures taken to reduce the budget deficit in coming years, just along the lines that the Deficit Commission has suggested. And the S&P warning, people can call it political, they can call it whatever they want, the S&P warning, which the only negative part of the S&P statement is to say if you don't get something done on the intermediate and long-term budget deficit, that's going to be a problem for your rating. Well, I think leaders of Congress on both sides of the aisle have already said that. It's just that S&P makes it a little more forceful.
John Makin, do you think that we're going to get an early deal on raising the debt ceiling?
I think that we're moving in that direction, and here again, this warning makes it more likely. I think the leadership in Congress and both sides of the aisle understands that there's nothing to be gained from stringing out a debt crisis or a debt problem related to the debt ceiling. So my guess is when we get back to Washington, by the time we get to May 16th, the outlines of a deal to raise the debt ceiling will begin to become clear.
I want to thank you very much. John Makin joining us from the American Enterprise Institute in Washington.